is ready? I know y'all got some dessert in you, right? She got the sugar flowing, right? Right? Y'all good? I said y'all good? Yeah. Good. So I will be introducing Dalia Mogahed. Now, she is a scholar and former director at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, where she led the organization's research on American Muslims. She's also the former executive director of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies, where she led surveys of Muslim communities worldwide. She co-authored the book, Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think. President Obama appointed her to his Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships in 2009. She was invited to testify before the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations about U.S. engagement with Muslim communities. She is also a frequent expert commentator in global media outlets and international forums. Y'all, would you please introduce her to the stage?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum, my sisters. I'm here because we have some critical work to do. You are all amazing, capable, trailblazing women leaders. You're doing vital work, like passing critical legislation, saving the environment, raising funds for the underserved, providing mental health support, and so much more. I am honored to be in your presence. And I think we're all here, partially at least, because we crave community. We have been through the collective trauma of almost 5 months of witnessing a genocide. And we need each other. We need these spaces for healing. We need these spaces for collective bearing of witness. And so I'm so honored to be a part of that. So what I want to talk to you today is about how do we find our voice and make positive change in the world, even when it feels insurmountable, overwhelming, scary, and impossible. How do we truly make change? How do we get past the resistance that we are definitely going to find? And when we do deal with that resistance, how do we hold on to the sense of empowerment that we are feeling right now? Today, I'm going to show you how we can truly create change and implement the ideas even when we hit that resistance, by leading with courage, compassion, and connectedness. Because leading is really about taking people somewhere they wouldn't have gone without you. What it means to be a leader is to assist people to do something that is sometimes uncomfortable, scary, or unpopular. I'm Dalia Mogahed, as you heard, and I'm not always popular. As a Muslim woman, like many of you, we bear the brunt of Islamophobia, according to ISPU research. The most salient and the most prevalent anti-Muslim trope is that of the oppressed Muslim woman. This trope has been weaponized to justify everything from European colonialism to the Afghan war to even the Muslim ban. So being us is not easy. And yet, here I am, like you, choosing to identify as a member of the least warmly regarded religious community in America. And I'm not scared. I mean, I'm a little nervous standing up here in front of all of you, but most of all, I'm very determined. I am determined to make change. And I think that my story can contribute to your leadership journey. I hope that you can learn about overcoming resistance to your ideas, overcoming resistance born out of stereotyping of who you are and your identity, to have the courage to speak your truth even when it's not popular. Believe me, I know. You see, you heard my bio, but what you may not know is that I'm a mom, I'm a coffee lover, I'm an introvert, I'm a wannabe fitness fanatic, and I'm a spiritual practicing Muslim. But not like Lady Gaga says, because I was not born this way. It was a choice. So when I was 17 years old, living in Madison, Wisconsin, so not far from here, I started wearing hijab. I started being very visible about my Muslim identity. And it was out of a spiritual and political awakening that started 2 years before when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And so some of my feminist friends were aghast when they saw me. And I heard secondhand that some of them asked, why is she oppressing herself? And the funny thing was, my choice was actually, for me, a feminist declaration of independence from the pressures I saw put on women to conform to an impossible standard of beauty. But most of all, it was about choosing conscience over conformity. And this simple decision helped me break an internal barrier of fear to do what was right, even when it wasn't popular. Practicing and identifying with my faith was a deliberate decision born out of conviction, not convention and not coercion. So like many of you, my background is in the sciences. I'm an engineer. I'm also Egyptian, so it means I'm an engineer, right? It's a redundancy to say both, but. So I graduated from college with a degree in chemical engineering. I joined a company called Procter & Gamble as an engineer. I got married, I had my first baby, and then later went to business school and eventually joined Gallup, the research and consulting company. And after a year into my time at Gallup, I got this huge, unbelievable opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. and head up the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies. Oh my God, it was my dream job. I couldn't believe this was my life. So I was 9 months pregnant with my second baby, and our family went and moved from Cleveland, Ohio to Washington, D.C. a few weeks before I was due, so I could start my brand new, amazing, exciting job. And then like 3 days into it, after I arrived in D.C., I was invited to speak on my very first Washington, D.C. Policy Forum panel. I was like, look, Mama, I'm in D.C. and I'm speaking to policymakers at a real think tank, just like the big kids. And she said, we're very proud of you, Habibti. I'm going to tell your grandmother to pray for you. And then I read the rest of the email invitation and realized I was going to need a whole lot of prayer. Because the other two speakers on this panel were Irshad Manji and Ayan Hirsi Ali. If you're not familiar, two extremely popular Islamophobic pundits who basically make a living generating prejudice against people who look and pray like all of us. And, they're big shots. They are on TV every day. They have best-selling books. And me, well, I was a nerd who just moved to DC. I had not published my book. I had never been on TV. I had never really spoken anywhere outside of a classroom. And here I was up against these two, seasoned, polished pundits. I was brand new, I was unknown, and I was completely terrified. So God had just put me in this place, and he was saying to me, you asked to be used to make a difference. So here you are. Be careful what you pray for. So have you ever been in a situation where you had to show up and do something that completely terrified you? That is exactly what was going on in this situation. And on top of it, I was very, very pregnant. It was July. And none of my clothes fit me anymore. The week before, someone had asked me if I was having twins, and I wasn't, okay? So I had this running negative voice in my head. What am I doing here? Why me? They're going to be so horrible. They're going to be so mean. It's going to be this horrible experience. I'm going to look like an idiot in front of my boss. I'm going to get fired. I guess it's probably good that we haven't unpacked yet. I should just say no. But then I thought, wait a minute. This was a big deal. This was an important venue that had an influential audience, and the research that I had done, that I had led, could actually help change a critical conversation by replacing misinformation with evidence. I was a survey researcher leading Gallup's work on Muslim-majority countries, and what this means is that I had the opportunity and privilege of taking the voices of ordinary people from all over the world that had taken these surveys and bringing them to the halls of power. And that's when it hit me. As terrified as I was, it was much bigger than me. This was about giving invisible people a voice, people who are often discussed but seldom heard from. And I could bring their voice, their point of view, to the policy forums of Washington. I could give them a seat at the table if I were brave enough to speak. So after throwing up, I took a deep breath and said, okay, this is a policy discussion. I'm a researcher at Gallup. I know my stuff. I have data and evidence, and they have hype and bigotry. This is about truth-telling. And I know every point both of them are going to make because they're on TV every single day. This was 2006. They have no idea what I'm going to say because no one knows who I am. So my weakness in this case was my strength. So I dug in and I did what I do. I studied and researched and watched every video they had done, read every article they had written. And it wasn't that hard because I quickly found that they repeated the same exact talking points. Islam oppresses women, destroy Islam, liberate women. I wouldn't give them a prize, for originality, but I had to admit their message was simple and very easy to believe in the political climate at the time. And of course not anymore because we're all so enlightened now. But at that time, a long time ago. But the Gallup data that, I was writing about painted a completely different picture. The research showed that Muslim women absolutely wanted equality, and they didn't think that they had it. They knew that their societies weren't perfect, and they wanted to work for a better reality, but they didn't blame their faith, nor did they want to eliminate it to be liberated. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. They saw their faith as a source of empowerment. It empowered women to own property, initiate a divorce, manage their own wealth, inherit, politically participate, and so much more. 1,400 years ago, literally 1,000 years before women in other parts of the world, including Europe, even could dream of such rights. So no, Islam was not what was holding women back, according to women themselves. Moreover, Muslim women had something to say about what they wanted, and they should be able to speak for themselves. So okay, I had my facts, I had my arguments, I had my new extra large maternity suit, and I was ready. And so I got to the venue and scanned the audience. The room was completely full. It was like standing room only. And it was exactly what I had imagined Washington policy circles. Everyone looked important, was wearing a boxy suit, and no one was smiling. And the moderator began. He introduced all of us, and the other two panelists were authors that had like appeared on Oprah, had won moral courage awards, and obviously they had groupies, in the audience, judging by the applause when they were introduced. And my bio basically read nerd from Gallup. So it was really striking. No one knew who I was and was wondering, like, what am I even doing there? So I would speak last on this panel, and I sat and listened to both of them say exactly what I knew they'd say. And the audience nodded thoughtfully. I heard each of them deliver their rehearsed applause lines, and guess what? People applauded. The audience was eating it up, and I was just sitting there more and more anxious. And then it was my turn, the pregnant lady with the headscarf, barely fitting into my maternity suit. My voice was shaking as I began, but I kept talking, building my argument, delivering my key data points, and then my voice got stronger, more dynamic, even persuasive. I had anticipated every single one of their points and had evidence to refute it. I not only dismantled their flawed narrative, but I offered a compelling counter-explanation with real evidence-based solutions like things like, education, human development as alternatives to the demonization of Muslim societies and Islam that they were pushing. And to my amazement, the audience was turning. People started nodding, even taking notes, which nobody was taking notes during their talks. Guess what? Because there was nothing, to write down. Even laughing at my rare jokes, right? This was a huge compliment. I was winning them over. And near the end, one of the other panelists, it was actually Ayan, seemed to actually admit defeat. She said to me, next time I'm gonna come with my own data. I'm like, okay. So after the panel, a prominent journalist in the room came up and told me she thought my presentation was the most compelling she had heard on the topic, which was a huge compliment. Thank you. And several people asked for my card. It was an induction into the DC policy community. Wow. Like I had done it, data won over demonization. I called my mom and I said, Mama, I did it, people loved it. And so guess what? I took a risk and it was all reward, no cost, right? No, wrong. A few days later, I got called into my CEO's office. So not my boss, but the boss. So I was like, wow, I've only been here a few days and already I'm getting a promotion and a raise. So I walked in and he looked very serious. He said, "I got an email today about your presentation earlier this week." Wow, more praise? Not exactly. The woman who had written in was a prominent, very, very prominent operative in DC. She was married to a high-level government official in the Bush administration. And he reads the letter out loud to me. And it has phrases like, "wanted you to know what was being said in your name," and proselytizing about Islam in a way that has nothing to do with Gallup. I froze. Oh my God, I've shamed my company, I've embarrassed my CEO. God, I knew I should have signed a month-to-month lease. And then he says to me, "I was there, and you represented our research and our company with excellence." So how often have you spoken up because you felt like it was important? And how often have you stayed silent because you felt like it was unpopular? How often have you kept quiet because what you said, what you would say would cause trouble or contradict what a powerful person in the room thinks? How many of us have been in a moment where we're asking ourselves, do I be quiet or do I speak? Do I play it safe or do I take a risk? Well, I'm not here to tell you that the outcome is always terrific, but there are things that can empower your message. So the first thing is preparation. You have to know your stuff. Do your homework. Research the resistance. Know what the opposition will say. Anticipate their strongest points. Then take them down one by one with facts. The second thing is you have to form alliances. So you cannot do this alone. You have to involve others. Find other people who will support you in your vision of change. So my boss in this case was an actual ally. He knew the research I was presenting. He knew I wasn't, proselytizing about Islam in a way that has nothing to do with Gallup. And because he was in the room, he was able to support me in that way. Never forget that it's bigger than you. Courage doesn't come from having no fear. Courage comes from the realization that some things are more important than our fear. And then have a generous spirit, not a needy spirit. And what do I mean by that? When you're approaching those you need to win over or convince or just explain or educate to, we need to approach these folks from a place of generosity, not need. So we want to approach them by feeling like, I have something to offer you, a better future, a better way to run your organization, a more effective way, a more accurate way to think about something. I am the one giving you. And when we approach people from that place of generosity, we are in a much stronger position than when we approach them from a place of need. Accept me, love me, approve of me. And actually, the truth is, had I not taken that risk of completely embarrassing myself and alienating myself from my new professional community, I would not be speaking to you today. It was my CEO's encouragement after that episode that led me to my current career. It was my delivery in that forum that brought dozens of other speaking engagements and media interviews and the opportunity to write a book with one of my lifelong role models and scholars that I really looked up to, Professor John Esposito. If I hadn't taken that risk, I wouldn't have gotten to give a TED Talk or be on The Daily Show or advise a president. And it's the first time I'm telling this story, actually, because I'm afraid that they'll come after me. But the truth is that these kinds of choices, do I speak or do I stay quiet? Do I stand or do I sit? They never get easier. So next time in a meeting, when someone who is more powerful or more popular than you says something that you know is not true, and everyone is nodding along and smiling, will you be silent or will you take a risk and speak up? You know, a young woman wrote to me, her name is Selma, about how she found her voice. And I want to share her story because it was so incredibly moving. So she said to me in her email, I'm being bullied at school. They're calling me the wife of ISIS. They are pulling my scarf off. They are asking me if I have a bomb in my backpack. I told my teacher, she said, and she did nothing. My parents called the principal and he did nothing. I tried to defend myself and it just got more abusive. So I felt helpless and alone, and soon my sadness turned into anger. I started to hate them, not just the bullies, but those that silently watched. My other classmates, my teachers, everyone involved in some way. I just wanted to disappear. So she went on to say, but then my cousin sent me a link to your TED Talk. I saw you speak to a huge audience with confidence, but what really affected me was you spoke about the problems we are facing with kindness and courage and not hate. You acted like you wanted to give your audience a gift of understanding rather than take from them the charity of acceptance. And I realized maybe I could do the same by shifting my focus from what I could get to what I could give. Maybe not to the bullies, but to everyone else. So I did something I thought I'd never do. Instead of disappearing, I asked my principal if I could give a presentation in front of the whole school. To my surprise, the principal agreed. I used your TED Talk as a model. Now, at this point, I'm literally in tears reading this email. Her email went on to say, I went on stage in the auditorium in front of everyone, people who had teased me and people who were silently watching, my teachers, my principal, everyone. My mom was in the front row, and I looked at her for reassurance. I was shaking, but I didn't stop. I spoke from my heart. I was so scared, but I told myself, like you said, that I'm not doing, what I'm doing is bigger than me. It's more important than my fear. I told my classmates about what it felt like to be bullied and how afraid I was to do this speech. She goes on to say, things aren't perfect now, but they are much better. I don't feel afraid anymore because I didn't let bullies take away my voice. MashaAllah. So making real change when you're going to face resistance begins with courage, just like what we heard. But it also requires compassion. Now, one of the reasons I was so scared to do the forum, that I just told you about, is that I was afraid of getting bullied in front of the whole world. And a lot of us have bullies in our lives. Some of them are other people, but a lot of them are actually our own inner voice. The inner bully that we allow to talk to us in a way we would never allow anyone else to speak to us. This inner bully tells us that we're selfish for having dreams, or that we're failures because it's taken too long to achieve whatever it is, that promotion, that business, that weight loss, that book. We all are being, berated that we're not smarter, we're not thinner, we're not quicker, we're not funnier, we're not richer. We imagine this stare of history or the glare of this imagined jury judging our every move. We hear the voice of a critical parent berating us for forgetting our homework even though we're in our 40s. We all need to stand up to that inner bully by practicing self-compassion. So we need to befriend that woman that we've been yelling at and beating up for so long and commit to progress, not perfection. So am I making progress toward my goal? Am I in a better place now than I was a year ago, 10 years ago? If the answer is yes, then keep at it and move forward. And if the answer is no, instead of beating yourself up, search for life-giving moments. Ask yourself, when is the last time you felt fully alive and totally engaged in what you were doing? How did it feel? How did it smell? How did it taste? How did it sound? How do you multiply those moments every single day? Looking for success, even if it's just moments, even if it's just glimmers, and learning from that success is the beginning of self-compassion. Change is also about approaching those who follow you and your peers with compassion. You know, courage is not enough. Courage is what ignites us to action, but it has to be tempered with compassion. We have to meet people where they are, not where we are, at any given moment, and then lead them. Compassionate communities are actually the ones that create brave spaces, where people can be their full selves and take risks. And this is the key to progress, productivity, and learning. So, for example, Google wanted to find out what made their best teams different from their mediocre teams. And they did this huge study on 100,000 employees to figure out what differentiated great teams from mediocre teams. And they looked at all kinds of things like tenure in the company, educational background, like many other things, size of teams, even diversity of teams and so forth. And what they found was really striking, that the one factor that most strongly predicted productivity, innovation, progress was not tenure or educational background or any of those things. It was what they termed emotional safety. It was about having a team that made it safe to make a mistake, to fail and not be ostracized for it. Because when you fail faster, you succeed sooner. And so they actually implemented a policy, which I thought was really interesting, that we can all implement for free in our organizations, where they, at their team meetings, they would share a risk they had taken that week with their work group to strengthen a culture that made it safe to be wrong. And I'm reminded of the kind of compassionate community that Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam fostered, where companions would be able to come to him and talk about their most vulnerable, embarrassing, scary thing to talk about. Things we would be embarrassed to tell our own parents, they were able to tell the messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam. Things we might not even be able to tell our best friends. But he made it so safe to be vulnerable in his presence. And that's why we learn from those stories. And they were able to build such strong communities, such brave communities. Compassionate leadership is also just our inheritance in general. What characterizes our Prophet ﷺ was his rahmah, He was, we are told that he was not sent except as a rahmah to all the worlds. So if we claim to be this man, this man's followers, that he is our example, then this has to be our signature trait. Not just to other Muslims, although that has to be the beginning, but to all human beings, not just the ones we agree with, but all people. And not just people, but the planet. When white supremacists burned down black churches in the South, Muslims raised hundreds of thousands of dollars online to rebuild them. When misguided policies shut down running water in the city of Detroit to thousands of people, the Muslim community and Islamic Relief stepped in and made sure the water was turned back on. Because it is right, because it is what was fair, and it was the right, and it was the Muslim thing to do. Muslims offer job training and hope to previously incarcerated Americans so that they can have a new beginning. Muslims feed the hungry and clothe the needy. Muslims work to protect the environment in greening projects across the nation. And it was a Muslim right here in Minnesota that brought the murderers of George Floyd to justice in the human rights trial of our generation. Attorney General Keith Ellison. This is our way. This is our signature. We are a community of compassion. So let us leave a compassion footprints everywhere we go. And then the third component of leading change is about connectedness. Making real change requires courage, compassion, and it requires investing in our collective progress by recognizing our connectedness. Now here I'm talking about amplifying each other's work, mentorship, and coalition building. So this really starts with a collaborative versus zero-sum paradigm, where my success depends on your success, not your failure. Where we promote each other's work, because that makes us all stronger, not weaker. Recently, high-ranking women in the former Obama administration shared a powerful tip about how women can get ahead in a male-dominated work atmosphere. And the way they do it is by helping other women rather than tearing them down. So to avoid one of the primary pitfalls women face in the workplace of not getting their voices heard, the women employed what they just called as amplification, where they would repeat an idea of a female colleague and give her credit by name. And the impact was not only that, one woman was able to break through, but that so many were able to break through, and that all boats rose with this kind of a strategy. So in your next meeting, try this. Seek out ways to promote other women's work. Talk about what other women have accomplished on your team or in your community. Repeat women's ideas and give them credit. I noticed that when I made this investment, it was reciprocated, like right away, by other women and even other men. And it became sort of a part of our subculture in our meetings. Instead of cutting each other down, we should brag about what we're doing, what other women are doing. The work and the accomplishments of the amazing people in this room. And then it becomes totally contagious. It changes our culture. It takes just one person to begin. And in the same vein, making positive change despite resistance means seeking alliances, advice, and networks from more senior people while building a pipeline of talent yourself. And what I'm talking about here is actively seeking out mentorship and providing mentorship to others. So growing up, and beginning my career, I didn't really have a lot of role models who looked like me. So it was one of my personal missions to provide, mentorship to other women in the way that I didn't have it. And once I started doing that, what was so amazing is how mind-blowingly talented these young women were. Advising them and mentoring them really truly feels like a privilege to me, not a burden in any way. I feel like I'm investing in the future. It's kind of like parenting, except it's an eager and receptive human being on the other side. So yeah, nothing like parenting, never mind. Mentoring other women really energizes me because I feel like I'm making a real impact. I'm making a difference in someone's life. And building this pipeline of talent helps everyone succeed. Now, the benefits of mentorship are very well known. We've probably all read about it, but it increases your self-confidence. It helps you learn how to take control of your career. It teaches you how to speak up and be heard. It educates you on how to accept feedback. It improves your interpersonal relationship skills. It provides access to new and more senior networks. And most of all, it helps you navigate your community or organization's culture and unspoken rules, both of which can be critical for success. So invest in seeking out a mentor. And honestly, most of my own mentors, actually have been men. Perhaps because of the nature of the work I do and who I'm surrounded by, just there aren't that many women around. So I mention this because of the importance of male allies in improving the community, improving the climate for women's leadership. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the relationship between men and women as being guardians of one another, awliya. Now this means not adversaries, but on the same side, looking out for each other and working for the common good of promoting good and forbidding evil. That is supposed to be the relationship between our brothers and our sisters. But I also encourage you to seek out peers for mentorship, and that can be just as powerful. So before leaving here, I want you to find someone else that you're going to check in with in a week, in a month, in 6 months, and see how you're doing, see how your progress is going. Remind each other of the empowerment that you are feeling right now. And then there's finally coalition building. This is incredibly important. My sisters, one of the key goals of bigotry is to distract you and exclude you. Make you feel alone, make you feel isolated, make you feel like you have no allies. Do not fall into either of these traps. We are not alone, and we cannot work alone. The diseases of white supremacy, whether in the starvation and carpet bombing of Gaza, or the murder of George Floyd and many like him, are the same. We are fighting the same threat, and we must forge real and meaningful relationships with other people of conscience to work for justice. Coalition building, contrary to a lot of people's understanding, is our tradition. The Prophet ﷺ had alliances with non-Muslim tribes. And it was an attack on one of the non-Muslim tribes that led to the eventual fall of Mecca. Working for the common good is a commandment. And we have to do that by first liberating our own minds. And what I mean by that is this. Oftentimes we look at the status quo and we see this hierarchy. It's a racial hierarchy. It's a socioeconomic hierarchy. And we can fall into the trap of asking, how do I ascend this hierarchy? How do I climb the ladder? How do I gain proximity to power? The actual question we should be asking, according to our faith tradition, is how do I dismantle this hierarchy and replace it with a more just order for all? So I hope that you all go back to the important work that you're doing with fresh eyes. See your familiar organizations or businesses with totally new perspectives. That's exhilarating, but it's also very scary. As you work to make change, there are going to be great days and there are going to be bad days. You're going to find allies where you didn't expect them, and you're going to have friends that will disappoint you. Some days you'll feel invincible, and other days you'll feel defeated. Leadership is a lot of things, but comfortable is not one of them. But you have to keep going, and you will keep going because it is too important not to. There has never been a time when we needed courageous, compassionate, and connected leaders more than we do right now. In our organizations, in our communities, and in our nation. The work starts now. Thank you.